I started, I guess you could say my real career started when I was about 14, and I was what you might call a mascot with a unit in the 49th Armored Division, Texas National Guard. And I went to summer camp, and I would shine boots and sweep out tents, and the guys would take me to the ranges, and I got to shoot all the stuff and learn to drive tanks and things like that. So it was a great adventure. Today, they'd put them all in jail for child endangerment, probably, but I was even picked to go and be on their rifle team one time because some guy got sick and I wasn't even in the Guard yet. And we went down to Brownsville and fired a M1 rifle match. And then I joined the Guard when I was 15 by faking my documentation. And then I decided I liked it. I went to basic training and came home from basic and said, maybe I like the Army. So I went and enlisted in the regular Army in November of 56. And I didn't retire until 1994. So I hung around a long time.
I mean, that's for sure. And guys, I need to, I'm not sure if I've linked it or not, but I will link it into the show notes. He had a wonderful sit down with Nick Brockhausen and is it Jeff Miller, his writing partner, Jeff? Jeff is also a very expensive, a very experienced special forces man, but not to the extent that that Mr. Darrell and Nick are on SOG-wise and Delta and all of that. But Mr. Moe, like he said, I mean, you can see from a very early age he is set up and basically from an early age knows he's going to be in the military. One thing I found out listening to you speak to Nick is before we even get to the SOG stuff, you kind of covered how early you got in. You're faking your birth certificate to where you can actually join the military. It's where was I here? Oh, the different things MOSs you went through. You went through being a tank. You wanted to drive tanks.
I was a tank crewman.
Tank crewman. You were, if I'm not mistaken, you were airborne with the 82nd, and you were a rifleman for a while. AIT, and I think you ended up doing Army Security Agency work for a while.
Yeah, that was after I got out of the Army. I went in. I enlisted. Well, I was in the tanks in the National Guard. And I knew that I didn't want to stay in tanks. So when I went in the Army, and I had a friend of the family who I thought the world of, he was in the 187 Airborne Regimental Combat Team in Korea. And I was kind of infatuated with the idea of parachutes. And so when I enlisted in the Army, I went airborne unassigned. I was terrified I'd be put in something besides infantry, but I didn't have to worry because they needed people in the infantry. And I went to the 82nd Airborne Division after basic training. And in those days, the 82nd used to run their own advanced infantry training within the different regiments. And when I got there, it's kind of interesting. I first was assigned to M Company 505. And when I walked in, the first sergeant gave me a platoon sergeant, and the platoon sergeant took me to the barracks, and all the bunks were rolled up and everybody's sitting against the walls. And I said, "What's going on?" He says, "Well, we're alerted to go to the Suez Canal." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And he says, "Come on, let's go." He says, are you qualified with a carbine? And I said, "Yeah, I'm qualified with a M1 carbine, grease gun, a few others." He said, "Okay, great." We went to the supply room, drew my field gear because they did it there in the company in those days, and went back to the platoon barracks and got my gear put together. And I was assigned to be an ammo bearer for the recoilless rifle, 57 recoilless rifle. And I asked him, "Well, what about advanced infantry?" He says, "Well, you'll get it in the airplane." I said, "Okay." I said, "What about jump school?" He says, "You'll get it when you go out the door." And, I'm 16 years old. I'm stupid as mud. And I say, "Oh, that sounds cool. I won't have to mess around all this time. I'll get right into it." And but then it all settled down. And then I guess they were changing things in the regiment. And next thing I know, I'm in E Company in the 2nd Battalion. And it was kind of interesting there to be a real minority because the triple nickel, the 555th Parachute Infantry Unit that had been an all-black paratrooper unit in World War II had been disbanded. And large numbers of the guys from that unit had been put in the 505. So all the NCOs and a great percentage of the troops were all black troops. And so I was not just a minority. I was a leg and white in a unit that was not. And the lowest form of life in an airborne unit, of course, is a leg. And that went for a little bit. Then they decided that Charlie Company was going to be the training company. And I went to Charlie Company and went through AIT. Finished AIT, and they put me into D Company, which was a weapons company. Each battalion had a weapons company. And I went to the machine gun platoon, where I was trained to be a machine gun crew member on the air-cooled and the water-cooled 30 caliber machine gun, which was really, machine guns were my love from then on. I was a goddamn good machine gunner.
And you mentioned you were saying, you know, it's wild that you were still using the water cool, but I mean, you mentioned graciously how much you loved that thing, and as long as you had water and belts of ammo, that baby'd rock and roll until the wheels fell off.
Well, sustained rate of fire was 250 rounds a minute, so put that in consideration. Of course, the water-cooled machine gun even had an indirect fire roll. I mean, there's things about it that soldiers today never heard of. I mean, it was designed to provide overhead cover to advancing troops, and it was designed to make it an area denial thing by just firing random fire into an area that was, you know, in defilade. It was quite a system, but it wasn't very flexible. And when they reorganized the Army the summer of '58, the water-cooled guns went away.
And what before we head on to the next part, what ended up? I know there were several more, considering we're early on. What immediately replaced the water cooled 30?
Well, we just kept the air cooled Browning 30 calibers, and then they had the A4 and then the A6, which was the one with the bipod, the shoulder stock, and all that stuff. So it became a more flexible mobile gun. Across the, you know, each platoon had 2 machine guns in, and that was a 230 caliber air cooled. You had a rifle platoon had 3 rifle squads and a weapons squad, which is 2 machine guns and a 3.5-inch rocket launcher.
Wow.
AKA bazooka.
Sean says, like you said, it was considered artillery in WW1.
Well, in fact, my dad was an H Company of the 3rd Infantry before the war, which was the regimental weapons company in those days. And those machine guns had mule-drawn machine gun carriages or caissons to carry the ammunition, because they were used for so many different things in the post-World War I Army.
Wow, that's amazing. Anthony had a little thing. A lot of the triple nickel went into 2nd Rangers during Korea.
Yeah, they had a Ranger company that was an all-black Ranger company, and those guys from the start were superior troops in selection and training. And when they got to Korea, they made a real reputation for themselves, because they fought their ass off. They did stuff with a platoon that a company couldn't do and stuff like that. So they had a great reputation. And then I think when they disbanded them, they were incorporated to the 187.
I believe so, and that'll come up. But while we're right here, considering you're in the perfect time frame, and you also were around for a very long time, I get asked this questions. It's a bit of a 2-parter, so I'll break this up. One, were you noticing? And I'm sure there were, but a lot of the black viewers, Anthony is trying to do one of our viewers that just commented, as you saw, he's really interested in the African American SOG, man, and he wasn't aware that there were any, and by God, there were a lot of good ones. Well,
in Omega, Project Omega, when I joined them, half of Omega was already moved to SOG, and the other half was still in the country. We were running missions basically along the border, and the SOG guys went on across the border. But in Omega at the time, we had a guy named Lewis. His nickname is Mang Lewis because he had a Chom team, and all the Chom's names start with Mang. Mang something, Mang Lot, Mang Gu, whatever. And then we had Spruill, which was one of the Recon team leaders. And they were both, well, I'll use African American because I think that's what most folks are using today. But we called them, they were black guys, and I'm a white guy. And so my vocabulary is going to reflect my age and experience.
I was about to say, you don't have to worry about PC stuff, whatever said.
Well, anyway, these two guys were top. In fact, Lewis had to quit running Recon because his team was coming out, and with the D model Hueys in the upper Highlands, they were really weak, and it didn't take much for them to start losing power. If that happened, the crew chief just cut the ladder loose or the McGuire lines loose, and that was it. Saved the airplane at the expense of the troops. And which is a hard pill to swallow, but we all understood it. And Lewis and one of his guys just decided before they cut it loose, his whole team was on ladders. He and one of the yards jumped at over 100 feet off the ground and went through the trees. Both survived it without serious injury, but Lou's back was messed up big time, and his point man had all his front teeth knocked out by a branch, so he looked like Andy Gump. But these guys were top-notch soldiers, and there was nobody. I'll tell you what, there might have been some racial stuff in the Recon guys and stuff like that, but I never saw it in those units. We didn't have time to mess around with those social things. We were too busy being a cohesive unit, and we supported each other. And they support. There was no divisions involved. And when I got up to FOB2 with SOG itself, we had a couple guys up there, and I never saw or heard anything against them. I mean, it's unfortunate, but you have people who are raised and indoctrinated with racism when they grow up, and they don't lose it in some ways, but at the same time, they don't practice it when it's in practical. I mean, in the 173rd, years later, we had some of that stuff, and in Germany, I had some of that to contend with, and it was just it's just an unfortunate part of it.
Yeah, later in the years, it seems like, especially for the more conventional grunt units, they had a real issue. But talking to you guys, I've never come across any SOG man who looked at a man and judged him off his religion or his race. It was always what he did in the field and how he conducted himself as a man.
Well, yeah, with Omega and SOG and in Delta later, I never saw any. A lot of times you would have the junior guy as a team leader because he was the best and the most experienced, and he might have an officer carrying the radio. Although, interesting enough, in Omega and all those teams, and in Delta, the team leader or the senior advisor carried the radio.